afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome. Let's turn the mic on. Good afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the tentative budget meeting this Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. If you wish to speak during the hearing of citizens, please pick up a card in the back of the chambers, print your name and topic clearly, and return the card to our board assistant, Kathy Tompkins. At the appropriate time, I will call you up to speak. Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to take a moment and recognize Mrs. Zucker and Mrs. Brown, who are joining us by phone conference today.
Hello.
If everyone can hear them. Thank you. Moving to item number 1 is the presentation of Superintendent's tentative budget. Dr. Bowden.
Yes, at this time I'd like to recognize our Chief Financial Officer, Mitzi Corcoran. She's got a few opening statements for you, and then I know you'll have questions.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I thought we'd just start with kind of a review of what we've been doing so far this calendar year with the 18-19 budget. So back in January, we met to begin the discussions, and that particular discussion was regarding schools of excellence, the legislation around that, regarding the 18-19 budget. In February, we began a little bit more of the budget discussion.
Mrs. Corcoran, hold on 1 second. I apologize to interrupt you. I know that it's hard to hear. Give me 1 second. Is the mic, are you guys having any problem hearing?
I can hear.
Okay. We'll try to hear it louder, but it may be, we'll do our best.
I think it's a little bit low. I don't know if our
if they can
control room could turn it up a notch, but it...
Sorry about the disruption. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mrs. Corcoran.
So in February, then we began, we reviewed the budget calendar, the process for the budget. At that point in time, we actually had proposals from the House and Senate that we were able to compare to kind of look at what our revenues might be for education funding in 18-19. In March was the big workshop. At that time, we prepared a preliminary status quo operating budget. And at the board meeting afterwards, we received approval to release the budgets to our schools and departments to begin our staffing process. You also had a discussion on the CIP and their project and budget, including potential debt scenarios, which were then not considered later on because we had adequate funding. In April, we discussed school safety and security options and those budget implications. In June, we provided you with the update on our staffing plans for schools and departments. At that time, we discussed the new internal police force, the mental health allocation, and the preliminary taxable assessed values, as well as CIP project and budgets. And then we're now here today to discuss approval of the millage rates and the tentative budget for advertising. So just a few quick summary items. We're projecting 18-19 enrollment to go up by an additional 311 traditional school students and 436 charter school students. Historically, our charter schools overproject their enrollment, so we're not anticipating it to be the full 436. Employees, we are anticipating 49 new positions district-wide. 29 of those are representative of the new internal police department. There are teachers and aides, mostly ESE. The teachers are based on growth. We have guidance and behavior specialists. Most of those are from grants and waivered positions. And just as a side note, we're still 235 positions less as a district than we were in 2007-8. Our free and reduced lunch population continues to increase and is currently at 54%, which is astonishing. Our IDEA funding continues to decline, but the number of students requiring services are increasing, so we're having to take that into account. The property tax revenues, which is the majority of all of our funding in the district, comes, the millage rate will be, or is projected to be 7.003 mils, which is a 0.206 reduction from 17-18 of 7.209. And our taxable values increased by 6.82% to $62.8 billion, which is just over the $62.7 billion valuation they were in 2007-8. So we've just hit the 7-8 values. But what we've not taken into consideration is all of the new construction that's occurred in the last 11 years. So we've still not quite fully recovered in terms of the valuation. General fund changes, there's a slight increase in Medicaid and ROTC reimbursements. There's an increase in the FEFP funding, a slight increase, and total local revenues are due to increase by $10.9 million, predominantly because of the change in the tax roll. And transfers are going up by $4 million. That's predominantly from the increased PICO funding that we then transfer to our charter schools for maintenance. On the appropriation side in the general fund, the salaries are increasing predominantly because of the salary settlement, 2-year salary settlement, and student growth in the new police department. Benefits, we did have an increase in our retirement rate. We are not anticipating increases in self-insurance for dental or medical. So that's helped quite a bit in the general fund. Our purchase services are going up predominantly for mental health allocation funding that we're receiving that's being contracted, and also additional ESC services for we can't find speech language pathologists, sign language interpreters. They're very hard to find, and so we contract for those. Charter schools are increasing based off of their projected enrollment increases and, of course, the increased PICO flow through. Energy services are going down. There was a temporary rate increase because of Hurricane Matthew, and we are anticipating a few electric incentives to come into the district. Materials and supplies will be going up. We have a textbook adoption next year. We have increased instructional materials that we need to be buying, and then the outfitting of the new police department. Capital outlay we expect to go down because we've purchased all of the equipment that we need at the STC campus in Northport, and the rest is just transfers. We believe right now between the anticipated claim liability that we have more than enough funds and reserves for the self-insured automobile and general liability. So with all that said, at the end of this year, we're anticipating fund balance to be at 10.38%. And as of 6/30/19, 35.6 million or 7.68%. So, questions? Yes.
Mr. Robinson? Thank you, Mitzi.
Mine center around mostly the end conversation when you were talking about the self-insurance. So last year was my first budget, and so I'm always expecting things to be similar. So maybe things change just because of the way it is. But I thought last year we had transferred in 1% of the salaries for workman's comp. You had told me, but this year I didn't know if my math was wrong, but it looked like it was 0.1%.
That is true. That is correct. It's 0.1%.
Was that a mathematical error, or was that?
No, it was deliberate. The workers' comp fund, we have a liability set up based off of the actuaries we have established in the fund, and then there is a fund balance that's in the fund.
Yeah. So the fund balance is going to go from $4 million to $1 million.
Correct.
So why did we transfer? Why did we transfer over $2 million last year to make it end in $4 million? Because it ended pretty much where we projected, so it's not a surprise that it's $4 million. So,
correct.
If it's where we expected it to be, why are we having to go down to $1 million this year? I mean, is this year some reason we don't think people are going to get hurt as much as they were last year or in previous years?
No, we just don't want to build up the fund balance by taking the funds out of the general fund and putting them in there. We have more than enough. The $1 million is over and above any anticipated liabilities from the full actuarial.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Last year
I understand.
Okay.
But we've done 1% forever and ever and ever, and then when we looked at it this year, it seemed like we were kind of building it up, and it didn't seem like there was a need to have that much money sitting in that fund.
So then for auto and general liability, similar issues, but even more skewed because they were not charging anything, right? I mean,
Well, the automobile and general liability is just a direct transfer from the general fund. Workers' comp is based off of employees' salary.
right. But the transfer for general liability is 0, and the transfer for auto is 0. So it's really not a direct transfer. It's a no transfer.
Correct.
And is that,
Again, those funds are sitting with $2 million fund balances over and above any anticipated actuarial liability.
okay, so I'm just curious if last year we gave too much, or is it this year is something special that the actuary did a different calculation? That's what I'm trying to understand.
The actuaries didn't do a different calculation. We analyzed the funds a little tighter. We have done it in the past. Workers' comp for a few years went down to 0.1 again to try to pull down the fund balance, because we put the 1% of salaries in anticipating the needs, and then when it builds up to a certain level, then there isn't the need. So then instead of having to refund the money from workers' comp back into the general fund, we just reduce the amount.
So $4 million to $1 million, that's not a huge drop in the grand scheme of things?
Because next year, if it goes back, it potentially could go right back to the $4 million. We don't want to maintain more money in our self-insurance funds than we...
I agree, but I just don't want next year where we have to do $3 million and we have like this seesaw action.
Well, we may go back to 1%. That's been kind of the district standard for years, and then when it gets too high, we drop it down.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
My rest of my questions are for Dr. Bowden, so thank you.
No, I mean, you clarified. I'm glad that Mr. Robinson brought that up, just because I'm confused. When's the last time we had it at 0.1 for the work comp?
I would have to verify that, but I think it was probably around 2008, 9.
Okay.
Oh, I was thinking it was more like 13, 14, but yeah, it could have been.
Because I understand not wanting to overhaul, but I also want to make sure, because we get audited, I'm assuming, to make sure we're...
Those funds are all audited, and we have the actuaries who perform the liability calculations for us. And
Okay.
we take those liability calculations and we set those funds aside, and they're on the balance sheet. They're no
Right.
on anything you're going to see. So that's already accounted for and taken care of. This is all just extra money over and above what any actuary has anticipated we would need.
Okay. I guess my question from the historical nature is what triggers it for us to move over to the 0.1 for a consistency standpoint. And I think from an accounting standpoint, we want to make sure when do we choose, what's that number, what's that threshold look like when we choose to say we've built this fund up to X, whatever the percent maybe, or what have you, or it's arbitrary.
It's usually the risk manager and myself and our actuaries or Aon sitting in a room and deciding if we've built up too much reserves, or we don't need to have enough, or we're okay, or it's kind of how we've done it in the past.
Okay. Thank you. Were there any other questions, Mrs. Goodwin? No. Mrs. Zucker, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
And Mrs. Brown, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay.
No.
I don't know. I'll hand it over to Dr. Bowden if you have any comments, questions.
No, that concludes the superintendent report, although I believe Mr. Robinson had questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Corcoran, and thank you, Krista, I know this is a tremendous amount of work in between these very large binders. I appreciate it very, very much. That is the conclusion of the presentation of Superintendent's tentative budget. Did you have an additional question?
Yeah,
Mr. Robinson?
yes, I do have just a question. Before I say that, I don't want to be remiss. I know how much work that they put into it, and it's an all-year project, and as soon as this budget gets approved, they're on to working on the next one. So it's not like they get a break. It's not like they're only working for 3 weeks out of the year. They're working on this all the time. Those constantly counts and shorts and overhauls and amendments, and the state, what the state says they give it, they actually do take it away, and so they have to deal with that.
And I just want to add that I can testify that many of you are in the office well past 10 o'clock p.m. So that just goes to speak to how serious the work is from their
I
department.
do appreciate it. So last meeting we talked about the charter schools. Do you remember that conversation?
Yes,
Is this appropriate time to talk about that or not?
I'll defer to the chair. I'm prepared to answer questions or talk to you about where we are.
I didn't know if what
Proceed, yeah.
point of the is this okay or not?
That's correct, because next is hearing of citizens. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to sure. So at the last meeting, I asked for a 3-year rolling average, and you said you were going to get it to me in my read ahead. I didn't. I mean, this is a rather large binder. Did I miss it in my read ahead, or was it not provided to me?
No, you do not have that 3-year average. When I said I would have that available to you is when we were asking you for a decision on that. So we'll have an agenda item on the August 7th board item. I do have some supporting information. There was a necessary change to the advertisement, is we have put a placeholder, a $2 million capital transfer. There are 2 proposed models. The upper limit of that modeling comes in at like $1.9 million. So we did modify the advertisement to allow for a transfer, and then it will be up to the discretion of the board whether you choose proposal 1, proposal 2, or choose to order off the menu. And so I'll have that information to you, and that will be the selection of the board. So
okay, I misunderstood. I thought you meant this read ahead. So it will be in for the read ahead for August 7th.
Correct, at which time we'll ask for guidance from the board as to how you want to handle charter school capital.
And so, walk me through. So we're approving this, and August 7th, we give you, and when does the final decision on that have to be made? Or is that August 7th is when you expect the final decision on that?
Well, on August 7th, so today you want to
And I know
talk me
there's
through the
so many
legal-
different timelines, and
I know. That's why I have a CFO.
Okay, so the issue is more about the advertising. There's a very specific trim process built in statutes. Mr. Hardy can attest to. It's very stringent timeline. So by the 29th day of the certification, we have to advertise our budget. So we had to make a change to the budget if we anticipate or we believe we may be making contributions to charter schools. That has to be posted in the ad. The ads are very expensive. I don't want to have to re-advertise. So we've modified the advertisement to include that particular item in the budget as well as the other capital program items. So that was the modification we made for this particular budget amendment, but we did not have time to change all of your budget documents or anything to make changes to allow for that.
So if I may, go ahead. Point of clarification, the advertisement we have right here in front of us is reflecting that change. Do you mind coming up to that mic just for record purposes as well? And then I'll move up to you.
Yes,
I just
ma'am.
wanted to.
We have to get Department of Revenue to approve our ad before we place it in the newspaper.
Okay.
So we have to send it to them. And you guys received these documents last week, and we just did it this morning.
Yeah, so this morning, the advertisement that you have basically has including charters and different, all the different categories. And it was sent to TRIM so that they can, Department of Revenue, so that they can review it. And this way we're not in any kind of violation. And so that would be the one that would get submitted tomorrow by noon.
Because the process
does it or
is
doesn't include
different
it?
from the way the statute was written previously. Previously, the way the statute changed for 1718, there was a specific section related to the statutory authority that we were required to make the payments. This was going back to the way things have been in the past, which means they have to follow our rules because it's our millage, it's not their associated millage. So we have to put it in every single section. So
Of the ad. Yes, when you look at the ad. And I can send it to you all, I just sent it to TRIM today, so I can send it to you all to see
So we're
it.
waiting for Department of Revenue to approve it, and then we will send you a copy. It won't be in the newspaper until Saturday.
Okay, Mr. Robinson.
So I'm the newest guy, so I've got my head around.
One second. I'm sorry, this is a problem. We have phone. Mr. Robinson has the floor. Mrs. Brown, I'll recognize you once he's done.
I know. I've finally got my head around that. When you advertise the millage, you can't go any higher. You can go lower. I got that. So when it comes to the budget, we're not including in it. Does that mean that we can add to the budget after you advertise, or is it like the millage, you can only go down, or it doesn't matter?
The budget is a plan, so the document can be amended at any point in time. You're not committed to the budget. You're approving,
The millage rate.
for today, you're really just approving for us to advertise. Next week is when you would actually approve the adoption of the tentative budget. What that does is it allows me to have the budgetary authority to pay the employees, keep the lights on, pay the bills.
My concern is I just don't want it to be, oh, I'm sorry, Eric, we advertised this way, and because we advertised, we can't change it. But you're saying that's not the case. Eric, all you need to know is that one rule about the millage. There's no such rule about the
Yeah, we had to make
budget.
sure we changed the ad in order to be able to make any kind of change to make payments to charter schools. That was the main thing we had
So
to
we
do.
would have to change the ad.
We just did.
This morning. Dr. Button, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So the ad itself provides allowable expenditures.
Correct.
And so if you do not reference a transfer of capital to charter schools, then the board could not subsequently say, I want to give $1.
Okay.
So by including it in the ad, it gives you the authority to give them $1 or to give them $5 million. But if you do not include it in the ad, when the auditor comes, the auditor says it's not allowable expenditure because when you said potential use of funds, it was not listed there. So that was the substantive change that required us to modify the ad to say that the board is contemplating an expenditure, and so we listed it on a conceivable expenditure of funds, which is really what that ad is all about. We advertise anything we conceive that we would have to fund.
That's a good explanation. Thank you.
That's exactly correct. It's all inclusive of anything we could possibly spend the money on, but we may not spend money on all of the items we've advertised.
Thank you. Mrs. Brown?
Yeah, my question isn't on what Mr. Robinson brought up just now, but if you could give me a paraphrase what I heard Mitzi and somebody else was speaking. I couldn't really hear what they were saying. Could you give me a brief overview of what they were talking about?
Yes, ma'am. She was basically reviewing, for the public record, the executive summary that's included in your binder. And so she took a couple of minutes just to summarize the budget, but it is the executive summary if you were trying to reference the binder that you received.
Right, but there was two women talking before Eric asked the question. What was that discussion?
Yes, that was the executive summary delivered by Krista and Mitzi.
Oh, okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, I've got that with me, so, okay.
Thank you. So I'm gonna turn you down here. Mrs. Zucker, did you have any questions?
No.
Okay.
But I would move to accept the.
I'm sorry, we're not. Thank you. Mrs. Zucker, we're not at that point. We have hearing of
You're
citizens.
not into it yet?
No, not yet. So
I thought everybody was through asking questions.
yeah, but we also have hearing of citizens. So bear with me 1 second and we'll move through the agenda.
Okay. Okay.
Are there any additional questions, comments? No. Seeing none, we'll move to hearing of, thank you again, Krista and Mitzi. Move to hearing of citizens. I do not believe we have any cards. So moving on to number 3, still had to offer it. Mrs. Zucker, if you, number 3 is the acceptance of proposed millage rates for advertising.
Okay.
I'll second.
Is there a motion, a formal motion?
Motion. I make the motion that Shirley seconded. I just said it very low.
Be approved for advertising as displayed in the enclosed book.
Oh, fine. Or I won't.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any comments? Mr. Robinson, please. Do you have any comments? No. Questions?
We should cut out phone calls.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. All those, since we have members on the phone, we'll do a voice vote and I'll do roll call. Mr. Robinson?
Aye.
Mrs. Goodwin?
Aye.
Mrs. Zucker?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item number 4 is the review and approval of the tentative budget for advertising.
I'm afraid to say anything. I move approval of the tentative 2018-19 budget for advertising.
I have a
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any comments? Seeing none, we'll take, or hearing none, we'll take a voice vote. Mr. Robinson?
No.
Mrs. Zucker? I'm sorry, Mrs. Goodwin?
Aye.
Mrs. Zucker?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and the motion passes 4-1. For the record, normally we identify the rates when we do the motion for the advertisement, and I did not see that being done. For clarification, based on the prior conversation that was just made, I want to make sure that the millage rates that would be advertised are accurate for the record. Do you have, I don't believe,
that chart that you're looking at.
I believe it's listed as under number 3, which is general voted operating 1 mil, general local required effort 3.755 mils, general local discretionary 0.748 mils, and capital outlay 1.5 mils for a total millage of 7.003 mils.
So you need a motion to reconsider or change the motion?
No, we need a, I just want to, do we need a motion to reconsider or do?
I think the motion, as I heard it, was to adopt the millage for to advertise as presented.
Yeah.
Those are the documents that are presented.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure because typically, and you're right, we did have it listed here in item number 2, just for the record that they be listed out.
And again, this is simply to advertise it. It's not adopting anything. It's simply advertising these millage rates. Next week will be the adoption, and we will want to be very explicit about the millage rates at that time.
But again, okay, perfect. So, but just to make sure that the millage rates that we have in front of us are what are going to be advertised, the 3.755, 0.748, 1.510, and 7.003?
Yes, they're nodding, but since they don't have microphones, I will say yes.
I just wanted to
for the
confirm,
record.
based on what was said there, that there was any kind of amendment. So very good that we are good. I do not believe there are any additional items before us.
I suppose I should have commented before, but could I comment now?
Absolutely.
On the millage rates?
Mrs. Brown, you have the floor.
I just want to point out that, yes, the millage rates are going down again, 0.206, and some of that has to do with the rollback rate that the legislature has asked us to do. We were allowed to keep the millage rate to include the new growth, but the up to 3% for most homeowners and larger than that for non-homesteaded did not see an increase in their millage rate. I think right now, if your taxes go up, it's because your property values went up. But the millage rate is actually going down this year. I just think we should point that out. 0.2 of a mil.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Goodwin.
And I would just add to that that has cost us about $100 million in the last 3 years in our operating budget. And across the state of Florida, that has cost $4 billion. So you take what class size amendment costs, which is about $3 billion a year, and there's conjecture that maybe that's not money well spent. And then you take this $4 billion, and it certainly is a big deficit for public schools.
Thank you. That concludes the agenda items for the day. Are there any additional comments, questions? Seeing and hearing none, the next meeting will be July 31st at 3 o'clock. 5:30, I'm sorry, it's not listed here.
5:15.
5:15, and we are adjourned.
July 30th?
Thank you. 31st at 5:15. Okay, I didn't